Historians tend to travel in schools, kind of like fish. Let's find out. While archaeologists and historians dealing with the ancient world tend to busy themselves with questions like where did people live, what did they eat, and who made that pot, modern historians don't need to ask such questions because, well, we have documents and video of the past, and some of the historians were actually there at the events themselves. As such, they tend not to busy themselves with questions of what happened, and instead earn their money asking questions like why did these events occur? Who was responsible for them? And are we interpreting these questions correctly? But the thing about modern historians is that they're a varied bunch who like to disagree with each other all the time, so it gets tricky for students of modern history, like us, to try and keep track of all their ideas and use them ourselves. To help with this, we've developed the idea of schools of history. Now, these aren't actual school buildings that modern historians run off to learn how to be good little historians, as cool as that might be, but it's a term we apply to any group of like-minded historians. When learning about Nazi Germany, we can identify two main schools of history. The first is the intentionalist school, and these historians argue that Adolf Hitler himself was the main source of power and ideas in the Third Reich. They claimed that all of the policies and plans that were put in place by Nazi Germany were the work of one man. Of course, others helped him put them into practice, but Hitler was the source and motivator of policy. In particular, the Holocaust was Hitler's idea. Opposed to them is another group called the structuralists. Sometimes they're called functionalists. And these historians believe that Hitler was, in the words of Hans Monson, a pretty weak dictator. They argue that the policies and plans of Nazi Germany were the result of others, trying to please Hitler and move up the ranks. People like Goebbels, the men of the Waffen-SS, and even ordinary Germans all contributed to the actions of Nazi Germany. It's called the structuralist school because these historians see Nazi actions as a function of the state structure, as opposed to the intention of one man. So, when we take this ragtag bunch of modern historians and pop them into their schools of history, they look more like this. It's much easier to track them this way. Now, we can get a bit of a handle on their ideas by looking at the titles of some of their books that each school writes. So remember that we said the intentionalist school argues that the actions of Nazi Germany came from the intentions of one man, Hitler? Well, they tend to write books that look like this. This book is by Alan Bullock, this serious-looking fellow here, and it's titled Hitler, A Study in Tyranny. Bullock argues that Hitler was the central figure of the Nazi government and all power flowed from him. More interesting are the subtle differences. For example, Christopher Browning, this handsome fellow here, wrote a book called Ordinary Men, in which he argued that the men of Police Battalion 101, who murdered thousands of Jews, were really good guys led astray by the evil influence of Hitler's plan. In direct contrast to this book, entitled Hitler's Willing Executioners by Daniel Goldhagen, this fellow here, Goldhagen argues that there were so many Europeans keen to kill Jews that the SS had to turn away volunteers, and this was due to a deep-rooted anti-Semitism in all of society. According to him, all that was needed was the right set of circumstances, the right structure. No convincing was needed. On the theme of anti-Semitism, intentionalist Lucy Davidovich, this lady here, argues in her book The War on the Jews that Hitler's main reason for starting World War II in the first place was to get access to Europe in order to annihilate the Jews, and that he had this idea as early as 1919. For her, the Holocaust was an invention of one man, Hitler. In contrast, Robert Wistrich argues in his book Anti-Semitism, this is Robert here, Anti-Semitism, The Longest Hatred, the Jews have been hated for 2,000 years or more, and this is part of the structure of European thought, going way back to the introduction of Christianity. To him, the Holocaust was the horrible culmination of a long history of anti-Jewish actions in Europe. So you can see here some of the differences between the intentionalist school and the structuralists. Of course, there's always going to be a few annoying kids who don't play well with others and fall between the schools, taking a bit from each. We call these guys, like Ian Kershaw here, synthesis historians. While they are less fun, they're often, well, right. Of course, there are other schools of history that we often see in our study of modern history. These include the Marxist school, the feminist school, the New Left, the conservative revisionist schools, and the Whigs. Some of these are fashionable and tend to dominate discussion, whereas others go out of fashion, like the poor Whigs who thought that all history was on a march ever upward towards a utopia. So, what have we learnt today? We've learnt that the idea of schools of history, in that like-minded groups of academics can be grouped together under a banner to make it easier to understand their ideas. We've learnt that the two schools of historians involved in interpreting power in Nazi Germany, the intentionalists, who saw Hitler as a strong dictator, and the structuralists, who saw him as weak. All of this is referred to as historiography, or historical perspectives, and is the study of the way others have interpreted the past. Modern history is awesome. See you here next time.